Hello, all. Welcome to my second episode of the talk series Product Leadership in 2021. Today, I'm joined by Rajesh Nerlikar. He's the Chief Product Advisor at Prodify, and he has recently co authored a book which is titled Build What Matters, where Ben Foster and Rajesh Nerlikar they talk about delivering key outcomes with vision led product management. Rajesh has 15 plus years of experience in product management, and he has helped many companies to build the product management framework and processes in their company. Uh, I will let Rajesh speak to himself a little bit more. Rajesh, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to participate in this talk series. And I know you are a busy man, so I really appreciate you taking the time out. Thank you. All over to you.
No, thank you, Anup. Really excited to be here, and thank you for having me and for doing this for the product community. Yeah, just a quick high level on my background. I am an engineer turned MBA turned product guy. So grew up down here in Texas, went to college at UT Austin, did electrical engineering, went to go work at Accenture for 5 years after school. Half of that was as a software engineer and architect, and then half of that as a business analyst within the government practice. So, that BA role was kind of my first step into product. And so, like you said, been doing it for more than 15 years now. Went to business school from Accenture up at Michigan Ross to transition into the world of startups. So worked for a student-run company that got acquired after we graduated, and then started my own company my second year of business school with a classmate. And we had a very kind of big focus on sustainability. So our first product was a Facebook app that lets you compare your energy usage to friends and family. And so spent about a year and a half trying to sell that to utility companies and home energy professionals. And then I got engaged and decided that a salary would be nice. And so that's when I moved out to your neck of the woods, Arlington, Virginia. And I joined O-Power as a product manager. It was another company that was doing something in this energy efficiency space. And that was where I met Ben Foster, who was the VP of product and design. And Ben had come from the West Coast to be the product executive at O-Power. He had worked for Marty Kagan at eBay. And so I didn't know it, but I lucked out and kind of grew up under the Marty Kagan school of thought at O-Power as a product manager. And that was my first step into the official title of product management, even though I'd been doing similar things for many years. From there, I went to a fintech startup in DC as well as a senior product manager, and we got acquired about a year after I joined. The company was Hello Wallet. We made financial wellness products that were sold as employee benefits. So I ran the product team for about a year after the acquisition, and then the company that bought us, Morningstar, asked me to come out to Chicago, and I took over a broader financial wellness portfolio. It was about $40 million in revenue and had a team of about 20 people that was like product managers, product operations, and technical project managers. And really enjoyed my time at Morningstar, learned a lot about the fintech space, but I missed the world of startups. And so I started advising on the side, and I really enjoyed it. Did that through 1871 up in Chicago. And so when we decided to move back to Austin a few years ago, I reached out to Ben, and Ben had kind of retired the day of the O-Power IPO about 7 years ago now, and started doing some of this ad hoc advisory coaching work with a lot of startups. And so I reached out to him, and it just happened to be really good timing. So we ended up taking over his practice because he went on to be the chief product officer with one of the companies he was working with. So I did that about 3 years ago. And so, like you said, in the past 3 years, I've worked with about 30 companies as an advisor, coach, and sometimes interim product leader. And collectively, Prodify has worked with about 75 companies over the past 7 years. And the three big areas that we kind of help companies with, the first one is like vision and strategy. Where's the product headed? How are we going to get there? Why will our product win? We had done so much of that work that we created the vision-led product management framework a couple of years ago, and then wrote Build What Matters last year to kind of provide a lot more detail on the thoughts and the ideas behind it. The second big thing that we do with teams is product team development. So we have a hiring service. We help teams hire their first product manager, their 8th, their 15th. And then we offer coaching services, everyone from product executives to individual product managers to entire product teams. And then the last big thing that we help companies with is what I'd call more on the product operations side, which is like, how do ideas turn into product? And that's everything from process to tools to org structure to skill sets and all the things that go into the product operations world.
Wow, that's quite a journey in the product management domain. Uh, really appreciate you sharing the story here. And I'm more interested to learn a little bit about the book that you have recently published, Build What Matters, in which you talk about vision-led product management. So I want to just kind of understand like how you came about this framework of vision-led product management, and how you decided to put it down in a book. So if you can share some thoughts on that, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the good things about joining BAN a few years ago in the sort of like product advising and coaching business was we would geek out, like, I don't know, probably once a month or something. We would just talk about things that he was seeing with clients, things that I was seeing. We talk about our historical experiences being like, full-time product people. And as we kept talking, we had started identifying a bunch of commonalities and patterns. And, from that, we realized that there were a lot of the same challenges that product teams were facing. And that's sort of what led to what we talk about in the first chapter of the book, is what we call sort of the 10 dysfunctions of product
Right.
management. And like every good product manager, we wanted to be super clear on what problem were we setting out to solve. And those were the sort of sets of problems that we realized were common and that the framework was intended to address. And so the genesis behind the book was really, we felt like we had learned a lot. And as much as we were trying to, share it with clients, and we started creating a lot of internal artifacts that were like worksheets and templates and guides to help them apply some of the concepts that or best practices that we had learned. We realized that having, creating the framework and then adding the book on top of it might be helpful for the rest of the product community. And I think
Mm.
for those of you who haven't read the book yet, like I think the one thing that you'll note if you do start reading it is we didn't want it to read like a textbook. And so rather than just present the theory and say, well, this is the framework and good luck trying to use it, we wanted it to be very actionable. And so we did like kind of two things there. One was we created the set of like worksheets, templates, and guides that went along with it. And there's actually a document that you can get access to that has like chapter by chapter resources. So if you want to try something that you read about in one of the chapters, there's like a worksheet or a template that you can use. The second thing we did is we just tried to tell a lot of stories for how that framework was applied in the real world, where it worked, where it didn't, lessons learned, what led us to create one part of the framework. And in the book, we have a lot of case studies, and there's a combination of our own experiences, our personal stories, as well as a few clients who were willing to share their story about sort of how the framework helped them in their business as they scaled. So
Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, I read the book, and the especially the 10 dysfunctions that you have mentioned in the first chapter. I think the stories and those dysfunctions, I think those feel so relatable. I mean, being in the product management field and having experienced different aspects of product management, it feels so relatable, and that story does come out from the book, which is great, and that's what kind of says that the book is winning. Uh, Now, if we jump to the current times, last year has posed a lot of challenges in the product management field, because product management by itself inherently is a very engaged role, wherein the product management team has to interact with sales and marketing, customer success, market research team, and the user experience team, and so many different cross-functional collaborations are required. But due to the current times, people are forced to work from home, and even Bill Gates says that 30% of the office time is gone forever. So I just wanted to kind of understand that how you see things, and especially how can a product leader dig out something from the book that you have just published, to cope with this change.
yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that before I answer it, I'll just cover one topic that I think is relevant, which is like, what does it mean to be a product leader, right? Typically, the role entails, some decision-making authority within, a jurisdiction, and very little sort of like direct reports, and like, so you have to lead by influence often, right? And so I think one of the gaps and one of the reasons we created the vision-led framework is that we felt that there had been a little bit of a pendulum swing on the agile side of things to a place where planning was almost seen as a bad thing, and the end state direction or a long-term direction or an end state vision was like kind of irrelevant, because you would just continue to iterate and kind of like react to customer feedback or user feedback and that was how you were going to find product market fit and build a big business on top of your product, right? And the reality is it's probably unlikely that you can iterate your way to like product market fit or find like great success. There has to be some combination of like innovation and iteration, and like that's kind of one of the framework that we present in the book. And Ben uses a good analogies, which is like if you think about like how a lizard has evolved over millions of years. Like it went from an amoeba to a lizard, but it took like a million years. And that's like an example of how long iterative changes would take. And no company has that much time to wait, right? And so I think one of the key aspects of being an effective product leader is being able to articulate that direction of where is the product headed? Why is that the right place? Why do we feel like what bets are we making about what's going on in the market, and what do we think is going to be true 2, 3, 4 years down the road? Like, and then how do we think we're going to get there and realize that vision, and then using that as the context for roadmaps and things like that, which is like,
right.
Hey, here's the big picture before you just zoom into the near term stuff, right? And I think that's an important part of product leadership. And obviously there's a storytelling aspect that goes with that as well, which is being able to articulate and get people inspired and excited about that direction. And more importantly, I think providing that context and almost like guardrails to say this is the direction, so that individual teams are empowered to make decisions on a daily basis. And they know that if they're trying to make a right turn over here while everyone else is kind of like headed down this way, that they would like kind of run into some issues, because they have that, a lot of teams will call it the North Star, whether it's the North Star metric or the North Star like just directionally. And I think that's like a key part of where product leadership, I think, is changing. And I think the other obviously kind of big thing that's going on is the role of product is starting to become more formalized and well known and understood. It's we're a relatively new function in the world of, especially in the world of technology, right? Compared to sales or marketing or engineering, which like everyone knows and understands. And so I think you're starting to see a lot more chief product officers take executive level roles and represent the voice of the product and hopefully the customer and all those things in a particular way. And so I think that's another major change that you're seeing out there, which is product executives having to step up and join the sort of leadership team at a company.
That's right. That's right. And I think the perspective of like the agile development, I really like that. Like due to agile development, most of the things are like happening in piecemeal, and the holistic picture sometimes could be missed out by working on small iterations. And it is very crucial for the product leadership to give proper direction to the team, and that would be kind of vital for product leadership's success. Point well taken. And like coming back to the topic of remote work now, because of the remote work situation, the possibility of working on the whiteboard, so if we are working in the office, we have the whiteboard. We can use the sticky notes to kind of do simple voting for particular ideas and things like that. So this in office communication or collaboration has in a way gone. It's all virtual now, and it poses its own challenge. So what is your take on that? How is that affecting the product leadership?
I think that I think people have adapted relatively well. It's not easy and it's a big change. But I think the proliferation of new tools that have come out, I think in the product space, I see a lot of our clients using Miro and obviously Slack and Zoom and things like that. Has helped. Obviously, you can't replace a physical whiteboard that everyone can look at, or the ability to like gauge body language during a meeting to know how someone might be reacting to a discussion or a presentation or something, right? So I think that nothing will replace that. I think we have to get back into the office for some of those things. But what I think has changed is, because of the virtual nature, I think a lot more things are happening in written format. And I would argue that that's probably a good thing, because when you're forced to put things down on paper, it's a little bit harder to be unclear, or it becomes easier to clarify your thoughts and stuff, not only as like an individual, but then as you start getting feedback and everyone has an artifact that they can look at and reference and ask questions about. I think that's really helpful. And I think honestly, like when we were coming up with the vision-led framework, what we realized is that a lot of the way that vision or big picture strategy gets communicated at organizations is verbally. It's almost like folklore, right? At an all hands, the CEO will get up and say, "Yep, here's a reminder. Here's our mission and our vision and our, what we're working on," and that's helpful, in some extent. But sometimes that verbal communication is so high level that if you were to go ask 10 people, "What's our vision and how are we going to realize it?" you would probably get 10 different answers. And the issue with that is, it's in that next level of detail where a lot of the sort of debate and churn and priority, like, prioritization issue, kind of concerns or issues come up, and road mapping especially, right? And so, one of the things we sort of like feel was necessary as we created the framework was, you do need to get to that next level of detail of like, what is our vision, but not from how, like, it's not a bulleted list of features. It's like, how would our customers experience our product, and like holistically, not just from the moment that they log in to sign out, but like, what about everything that happened before then? How did they find out about us? Why did they try us? Like all those things, right? And I think having that written artifact that says, this is the way, that this is the type of experience we want to articulate, I think is powerful, especially in a remote world where you work at a startup and you're growing and there's like 3 new hires a week. How are they getting ramped up? How do they have any sense of where the product is headed and all those things, right? And so I think it's an important consideration, and like hopefully a good thing. Now, what it does create is a challenge, right? Now you got to find time to be a lot more thoughtful and write things down in a way that you might not have had to before, where you're just in a meeting and could talk it through. And I think that those meetings are still necessary, right? Ideas form over time and they evolve, and like, we think of some of these artifacts in the same way you think of a product, which is like, in an agile way, you put out a version of it and you iterate on it because you get feedback and you tweak it, and maybe you realize you totally forgot a whole section that you need to articulate. But I think that's another big part of this, which is like, how do written communication become more common, and so what are the artifacts that product teams are using these days to make sure they're aligned on direction?
Right. So in a way, what I hear from you is that it's in a way like good thing for product management community, that people are now writing down, making sure that the thoughts are clear enough to uh, explain it well.
I think it's a good forcing function. I recognize that it's not always an easy thing to do. I myself, just even though we wrote the book last year, I know how much time it took us to write that book, and now we write, we write follow-on blog posts and like, do other things. And so I know that writing's not an easy skill, and it is time-consuming if you want to do it well. So I'm not going to say that this has to be the only way, and it should, we should just switch to this forever, because I think that you can't discount just talking and just being able to like kind of riff on ideas. But
Yeah, that's a good take. Yeah, definitely. In the book, you also talk about like setting up the right product management processes and even the uh, hiring practices, or how you can build that strategy. Um, how do you define that in the current times? Do you see that the hiring process should change, or the product management processes should change?
no, it's a great question, actually. If I were going to zoom into hiring, like I mentioned, we have a hiring service, and so we help a lot of people who have not hired product people before hire their first or second or third product person. And I would say that our process hasn't changed drastically. One of the key things we do in that hiring process that I don't think has really changed that much from COVID is think really hard about what are the top 1 or 2 skills or experiences that we need to add to our team to like kind of help accomplish our goals for the next 1 or 2 years, right? Like, it's not like, especially a startup, you're like, it's not like for 10 years, right? Um, and then using that as a way to sort of like obviously craft the job description and attract the person who would have those skills and be interested in the role, but also we would custom make a homework assignment that pressure tests that skill. Because I think one of the hardest things about hiring product people is the technical or craft skills are a little bit harder. They're not as objective as like an engineer who submits a code assignment, and someone could objectively kind of look at it and say, yes, I think the structure and the formatting is looking good, the thought process, scalability, like all those things, right? You have a rubric that you can look at. Well, with product management, because it's such a collaborative role, even if someone worked on a product that looked like it was doing really well externally, you don't know if they were writing momentum or what their role actually was. And so one of the things we really emphasize in the hiring of product people is something that helps you pressure test their actual abilities and craft skills and things like that, and tailoring that to the role and what the needs of the company and the sort of like business is. But I'd say the one thing that's changed is, obviously, if you're going to ask someone to take that amount of time during a recruiting process to like, think about some answers to some questions, like, one, hopefully it's a good representative view of the type of work they'd actually do in the first few months of starting. And so I think from that perspective, it should be like a good thing that they get some exposure to it. But historically, what we used to do is we would ask people to come into a conference room and do like a little bit of a panel presentation and showcase their thoughts on the assignment, so that it wasn't just used to like as one of like a check boxes to check of like, yes, this person did well, but because it's such a collaborative role, we would ask, for example, the design and engineering team would do a panel interview, and they'd say, okay, like, now imagine you got this case study and you're doing a kickoff meeting with us and you want to explain that we need to build this new feature and here's why, like, go ahead. And they would ask all the questions that they would normally ask to the product person. And that way it's like, it's also representative of the culture and the type of personalities and things like that, right? So I think something like that has gotten a little bit harder to do, but what I have seen clients do is they still do it. It just might happen over Zoom and you don't have a whiteboard to go draw on as easily. And so I'd say that's another sort of implication right now on the remote work side. And then, of course, body language, I think, is an important part in the hiring process, and just being able to gauge that. And it's a lot harder to do over Zoom than it is, in an office.
Right, right. That's true. That's true. Yeah, remote interviews is going to have its own challenge. But yeah, I like the framework that you are putting up, that giving some home assignments and trying to get the panel interviews done to gauge the not just general skill set, but also in general, like how they collaborate and communicate would be something that would be important. Right, right. Moving to the leadership and decision making side, um, it how can a leader be equip himself in the current times to be a better decision maker? So not just talking about the hiring or the product management processes, but in general, like if we speak broadly enough in the product management role, talking about the customer focused decisions or internal decisions, how do you think that a leader should be equip himself to be a better decision maker?
Yeah, well, I think that there's probably two major things I would call out there, which is that they should have evidence and be transparent on their confidence level in some of the decisions they're making, right? So if I was going to do a deep dive here on the evidence side of things as a leader, what are the types of evidence you would use to make a decision? Well, I kind of feel like there's three that we would normally talk about, right? There's quantitative, there's qualitative, and probably competitive. Which sort of touches on the market dynamics as well. And so qualitative, obviously, like voice of customer, like customer discovery interviews, whether you're talking to prospects or existing customers or power users or your customer advisory board. To me, nothing trumps conversations these days as an input into major decision making. As much as we see a lot of product teams try to become more data informed or data driven or whatever the phrases that they want to use, you just don't always have the data. There's not enough quantitative metrics that can help you make some really big, especially at the vision and strategy level things, right? I think that's like harder to do. But on the quantitative side, obviously, like financials and just understanding how the sales pipeline and projections are looking for the business, product usage metrics. So like who's logging in, who's not, what features are being used, what segments seem to be like, do we resonate with, and where do we not? Those types of things I think are critical these days. And then that last part is really like, like I said, more competitive. So do we need to respond to a competitive threat? I think is the first kind of question in the decision-making process. And if so, what is the reason that what are we really good at that we want to keep as our competitive differentiation, and how do we make sure that like, shines through during sales, marketing, demos, product onboarding, like design, like everything, right? And I think that's like a major one on the competitive side. And so those are kind of like the evidence-based things that I think leaders need these days, is to like be able to prove with some data, whether it's hard numbers or not, or just have that available to help make the decision. And then I think there's this confidence thing that I mentioned, which is like at the executive team level, especially when you start talking about vision and strategy, where's the company going and where are we going to experience growth from and all that stuff. There's a crystal ball sort of like phenomenon there, right? They got to make some bets about what the future holds and where the market is headed and which segments are going to like, where can we win, where can we not, and all those things, right? And I think one of the things that's probably worth calling out is just being open and honest or explicit about how confident you are about certain decisions. And if you're not, if it's low or medium, get down to the next level and say like, so what are the hypotheses or assumptions we're making that make this a risky decision to make without more information? And it's like, there's almost a little bit of a loop there, right? Which is that if you say, oh, I'm not sure about X, Y, and Z, and then you say, oh, maybe I need to do more customer discovery interviews, or I need to go do some more market research or competitive analysis to help feel better. And obviously there's, you're never going to be 100% sure about any decision, but the idea would be that you feel pretty confident and that everyone else does, because there's a shared understanding of the sort of like factors that were used to help come to that conclusion and that decision.
Right, right. Yeah, the you rightly pointed out that product management role is mostly kind of in a vagueness, wherein you are testing the hypothesis. You do not necessarily have the good enough evidence, but the decision comes in on how you test the hypothesis and how you come up with the results of testing those hypotheses, and kind of take that as a guiding principle moving forward.
Yeah, and I'd say the other thing that has come up with a few clients, and that I had done myself, kind of at my time at Morningstar and stuff, was like basically having a decision log. Because sometimes what happens is decisions are made, and then later someone says, "Why did we decide to do that?" And sometimes literally it's been so long or so much has happened that even the people who are actively there were like, you know what, I actually don't remember. And so what we encourage teams to do now is actually, at least for major decisions, just jot down a few bullet points about sort of what options were considered, what was finally chosen, and like a little bit of rationale for why. And sometimes it's helpful, especially if you operate in an organization where the team is growing fast or team members are kind of rotating quickly, right? Then sometimes having that historical context is helpful.
Yeah, that's actually a true story for us as well. Like in our company, we were discussing about one of the features, and then we were not able to recall that why did we make that decision, and we just, I mean, it just felt so relevant that I felt that okay, we should have documented that somehow, that how did we make that decision, and then in the current times, of course, we were not able to come up with anything to justify that decision for the current times. So we kind of changed on what we were doing. But that's a good point taken, that having the decision logs will help you why you took that decision.
Yeah, and I'm not a big documentation fan, so I always think about what's the lightest weight thing you could do. Like to me,
Right.
this is like, what could you do in 3 or 5 minutes that just could save you hours later, or weeks even, exactly on this, which is, and that's just not to say that you don't reverse
Yeah.
or like, change a decision that was made, but sometimes it's helpful to know
Right.
the historical context of it.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's helpful to have that context in some ways, even if it's just like a few quick keywords onto that decision log. That's helpful.
Yeah. And I do think this is part of that product leadership, which is like really rationalizing why things are being decided, right? And whether you write it down or not, I think no matter what, you have to communicate the rationale behind these decisions. And that's an important part of the product leadership role.
Right. Yeah. That's great, great. I mean, so much of your conversation was very much relatable to my experience, at least. I'm sure many of the audience might also be feeling the same. Just to kind of wrap it up, what advice would you give to the upcoming product leaders, product managers, and how they should navigate their path to their growth?
Yeah, sure. Wow, there's probably a lot I would offer. I think, well, let me start with something a little bit more tactical, which is, I do talk to a lot of people who ask about, hey, I'm not sure what my career path should look like. And so, what I do tell them to do is just think about what have you done that you've liked? What have you done that you've not liked? What are some of the jobs that look interesting or that you could imagine or want to be doing in, I don't know, call it 5 or 7 years? And we kind of use a little bit of the vision-led framework concepts here, which is like,
Right.
go figure out what is that dream job and what is the vision for where you want to be in a few years, and then work backwards from there and say, well, what are some of the experiences or skills you need to get to that role? Hopefully you can talk to a few people who are in a role like that or similar, and understand their path, and then say like, well, okay, so we have a PM skills assessment that we use to kind of help certain people that we coach with this in particular, which is like, wow, I really haven't done a lot with financials or pricing, and I think I have to have that experience in order to get into like a CPO role. Okay, so when are you going to get it? Is it now? Is it later? And like all those things, but like I think part of it is being intentional about that gap analysis of what are the skills you need to get to where you want to go, and then what are your stepping stones to like get there, right? And it doesn't all have to come from one job or role. Sometimes people take lots of different paths to get into the role that they want. But it's helpful to sort of have a rough sense of where you think that role, how you're going to map that out. And so I think that's one, is just to be thoughtful about where you're headed and how you're going to get there. I think two, on the leadership side, I think the hardest part in stepping into the product executive roles is really like, there's a new set of stakeholders, right? So like the board, as an example, if you're stepping onto an executive team, is a whole new stakeholder that a lot of people just are they don't have much interaction with, right? Or they're shielded from, maybe is a better way to put it. And so I
Yeah.
think that was a kind of a big transition. And with that comes, again, I think it's all the things we were talking about, which is the ability to articulate what was the decision, what choices, and rationalize why this is the path, and like, and build inspire people and build confidence in you as a leader, that you've done your homework and research. You understand the market, you understand the customer base, you understand the business well enough to be the person to step up and say, I have a thought on where we should go, and let me tell you why, and to get buy-in and inspire them.
Right. Right. That's definitely great conversation, Rajesh. And that's a great summary and a great experience that you have shared from whatever projects you have worked on, and from the book as well. It's a great learning for me, as well as I'm sure for the audience as well. Uh, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation. It was very helpful. Uh, Thanks a lot.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you, Anup, for having me and for doing this for the product community. I know it takes time on your end as well to put these things together. So really appreciate it and enjoyed being here.